Well, good morning, everyone. Very warm welcome to our Fireside chat here at BioEurope in Leipzig. As many of you will know, the long-awaited clinical trial regulation became applicable in January of this year. The aim of the clinical trial regulation was to build on the clinical trial directive to harmonize requirements across member states and to further support the transparency initiatives. Arriello is a European-based consultancy focused on providing regulatory, pharmacovigilance, and quality services. They commissioned a survey of 400 professionals across pharma, biotech, clinical research organizations, and consultancies in the UK, Germany, Switzerland, and the US. The objective of the survey was to engage how industry has adopted and is adapting to the clinical trial regulation and how it's finding using CTIS, the new EMA portal for clinical trial applications and ethics committee submissions under the CTR. This survey produced some surprising results. 99% of responders had already registered a new trial in CTIS. 37% said that the process was faster than they expected, and 31% said that it was easier than they thought. With regards to the quality management system, 80% of large pharma had already updated theirs in preparation, but only 2/3 of other companies had done this. So from Arriello, I'm delighted to present Nicola Kidman, who's the Principal Consultant of Regulatory Affairs, and Kieran O'Donnell, who's the VP of Global Drug Safety. And we're here this morning to discuss the results of this survey, what they mean for industry, and what happens next. So Nicola and Kieran, it's really great to be here talking about this. What were your first impressions of the survey results?
Yeah, thank you, Laura, and good morning, everyone. As you said, surprisingly positive. Not necessarily in line with what we're seeing from sponsors. We've actually observed a lot of hesitancy from sponsors in this first year of transition where they can still use the clinical trial directive. And it's only with the mandatory deadline looming that we're starting to see sponsors asking more questions about what they need to do, looking for support, and in some cases panicking a little bit that they haven't got much time left. So as you said, I think 99% of respondents said they'd registered a trial through CTIS, which is interesting and again surprising to us. When you actually look at the EMA KPIs, I think it's something like up until the end of July, 188 sponsors had put a trial through CTIS, of which only 43 so far had had a decision. So the two sets of numbers between the survey and the EMA KPIs aren't necessarily tallying, and we think there may be some confusion about what is meant by registration, maybe within the system rather than registration of a clinical trial.
Right, and we're certainly going to have a think about that. What did the results say about the timelines? What did the survey results say?
Yeah, again, very positive news. 3/4 of respondents are saying that they found that assessment timelines are being met, which is great news. It's one of the aims of the regulation to have more harmonized timelines. And again, when you look at the EMA KPIs for timelines, that is also coming out with something very positive. Again, to the end of July, the average time for an assessment was 74 days, which is coming in under the 106 days they have to assess a standard product. So great news on the timelines front.
Yeah, that's really good. And Kieran, your expertise is in drug safety. What did the survey results say about the readiness of the sponsors' quality management systems, which is going to become mandatory?
Well, this was certainly one area where we saw contradictory data.
Right.
Almost all of the US respondents stated that they had updated their systems, but there was a stark contrast between the US readiness and European readiness. only over a half of UK and Swiss sponsors said that their company had updated QMSs, which seems to be contradictory if almost all respondents had made a submission through CTIS. In our opinion, this lends itself to some question about either they misinterpret or misunderstand the requirements and or the complexity surrounding the actual submission and preparation requirements. Bearing in mind, this is going to be mandatory very soon.
Yeah, and so already we're starting to see some divergence then. You've got the survey results and the EMA KPIs that are showing that perhaps there's a lack of tallying up here of the data. So what I'm hearing is that that's suggesting that industry is not 100% ready yet, and we have this January the 31st, 2023 deadline looming. And we all know there's nothing like a deadline for a bit of last-minute inspiration. So what do we have to do next then to be fully prepared for this transition?
Yeah, I mean, preparation is key. Ideally, it should have already begun or even been completed, but that's in an ideal world. Depending on the size of the organization, it could take between 2 to 6 months, maybe even longer in some bigger companies, to get prepared for this. So if companies and sponsors haven't started now, they need to start now. There is no time to lose. And in terms of the things they should be doing, it's things like making sure CTIS is set up for all the right stakeholders and they all have the right permissions they need to use the system. The other common area of confusion is the EMA SPOR system that CTIS uses. So CTIS will drag organization and addresses and details from the EMA SPOR system, which on the face of it can sound quite simple, but if anyone has ever experienced using SPOR, it's not an easy system to use and grasp. So I would suggest that if you don't know how to do it, that you get some support with it, because it can really hold you up.
And Kieran, I understand that the SPOR setup can also impact pharmacovigilance. Is that right?
It is, yeah. CTIS, SPOR, EudraVigilance, they're all interconnected now. EudraVigilance set up as part of sponsor readiness is often performed after CTA EC submission. It means that EudraVigilance itself is dependent on the correct setup and maintenance of SPOR.
Right.
So if SPOR isn't ready, fully enabled, fully registered, it means that you can have downstream difficulties in submitting SUSARs to the European agencies and national competent authorities, therefore risking non-compliance.
Okay. So presumably all of this is relying on the correct sponsor setup. And for those of you perhaps less familiar with SPOR, is the Substance Product Organization and Referentials database within the EMA platforms. And yeah, we certainly know from experience that it's not straightforward, it's not intuitive to use, and there is some potential for delay to be created. So whilst we're setting up the sponsors correctly within SPOR, what does that mean that we need to do within the sponsor organization in terms of roles and responsibilities?
Yeah, so it's roles and responsibilities is a big part of the preparation for this regulation. We're all used to having to submit a regulatory and an ethics application in every member state we're running a study in. Whereas now, that flow of work is going to change. Everything is going through this one portal. You have a part one, which is essentially your old regulatory submission, and there's going to be a harmonized review, which is great news. It will hopefully stop these divergent protocols that we currently have. But then you have the part two, which has to be submitted for every member state that you're running in, and that's essentially your ethics application. And even though it's one submission through one portal, that still needs a lot of local nuances in that part two, and it's important that you retain and rely on that local expertise that you probably already have in your organisations already.
And so not forgetting quality management service, inspections, how does this impact QMS, Kieran?
Significantly. I mean, for those nearly half of UK and Swiss respondents that hadn't updated their systems, this means that all of those sponsors will have to do gap analyses of their quality systems against the quite extensive requirements of the CTR. All of their SOPs will have to be updated. All of their staff trained. It's a significant task. And the challenge is that we don't have any inspection metrics yet. We'll probably have to wait a year and a half for the agencies to release metrics to tell us how successful or how unsuccessful those implementations have been.
So it sounds like there's really quite a lot of work, even at a deep level, in order to prepare ourselves for this deadline. Do you see any significant barriers, Nicola?
Yeah, so actually something that the survey highlighted was that 35% of respondents said that training overload was a barrier to being prepared for the CTR. And if anyone's seen the EMA website, there is a ton of guidance on this, which is great. Certainly when the Clinical Trials Directive came in 2004, there was no such amount of guidance. But it's so much, it can be overwhelming. And I think what's really important is that organisations aren't just telling their staff to go and train on the EMA website guidance. They need to put together a cohesive and comprehensive training package that brings everything together, and then the staff can refer to that EMA guidance as backup and for the nuances that they need.
Yeah, there's no substitute for real life practice.
Absolutely not. We're all learning.
And the EMA help desk is available to support as well. Have you had any interaction with them?
Yes, it is available to support. I think what's important to understand is this is a new system for them as well, and we have found it can be a bit patchy. We know even last Friday there was a down system of the CTIS system for unplanned essential maintenance. So they're still learning as well. So just my message is don't leave it to the last minute. Make sure you're planning so you can deal with any IT issues that happen as well.
Yeah, good advice. So even though there's clearly a lot of work to do for everyone within industry, once we've been through all of these steps and we've successfully set up the sponsor in CTIS and SPOR, what should we be thinking about at the trial level in real life? How do we prepare for this?
There's a number of considerations. We've talked about SPOR as part of the general setup and preparation, but there's also trial-specific requirements too. All of the sponsors' vendors, all of the sponsors' sites need to be put into SPOR. So that's quite a big task if it's a large trial. With regards to pharmacovigilance, all of the details of investigational medicinal products have to be registered in EudraVigilance, remembering that the systems are interconnected. For country-level strategy, to be able to submit part 2 of the submission, all required country documents need to be ready. Those requirements, however, vary from one member state to another. So we haven't really achieved full harmonization yet. Things like contracts can really hold up the submission process. We have experience of working with one sponsor who had over 50 pages of validation requests following the submission. This means that you need to plan your strategy with everything from timing to the addition of new member states and new sites. In transparency, we'll talk about this a bit more later, but you need to be prepared to submit redacted documents as well as the full versions as part of your initial submission.
Great, thank you, Kieran. So it sounds like we have activities both at the CTIS level and at the clinical trial level to be prepared. One of the CTIS functions, though, is that it's going to be a central platform for all clinical trials in Europe. And we've really focused so far on trials that are upcoming. We want to make the submission. What happens if we've got a clinical trial that's already ongoing? What do we do with that?
So the deadline for ongoing studies to transition to the new system is the 31st of January 2025, which feels a long way off, but it's not really. As we know, these things creep up on us. And in terms of preparing for that, the advice to sponsors is look at all of the studies you're running in Europe. Look at their timelines. When are they due to finish in Europe? Are they on track to finish on time? Is recruitment going as planned? Because if it's not, you might need to be planning to transition even though you didn't think you were going to be. And it's not something that you want to be doing at the last minute. So it really takes knowing all of your studies and keeping on top of it, keep looking in, keep checking in on those recruitment dates to see if you're going to if you're going to come in under the deadline or not. And if you know you're going to go over the deadline, then obviously you can start planning for that now.
Yeah, so planning and preparation are the themes that are starting to come through really, really strongly. So we've talked about the challenges, the amount of work involved. We've also talked about the divergence between the EMA KPIs and the Arriello survey results. But what are the positive aspects of CTR becoming mandatory?
Well, it's certainly not all negative, which is the good news.
Good.
We do think it will lead to further harmonization. The problem with the directive coming into force in 2004 was that it was a directive. It was meant to bring harmonization of clinical trial applications, but because it was a directive, it allowed each member state to transpose that directive into local legislation and therefore introduce local nuance, local difference, moving away from harmonization in the first place. Being a regulation, the CTR is directly applicable, and it introduces also a harmonized review of Part 1, which is good. For transparency, there are certainly strengthening requirements in the regulation. So whilst transparency has been a hot topic for quite some time, strengthening those requirements can only really be a good thing. The regulation also promotes patient advocacy and patient engagement as a submission requirement. For PV, not really much change. We were submitting DSURs through CTIS for some time anyway, so no change there. As a side note, and again, with UK and Brexit moving away from Europe, the UK decided to implement, or had to implement, their own simplified version of the CTR assessment in the form of a combined review. So they've introduced another IRAS portal to allow that submission to take place. Our experience, however, to date has been pretty positive. But it is something that if you're a sponsor and you're looking for to conduct a clinical trial in the UK, you'll have to take the UK requirements and the IRAS portal into consideration, especially for any early phase or any fast-track review applicable to your trial.
Well, I would like to thank you very much, Nicola and Kieran. This has been a really, really insightful conversation. It seems the industry is very positive about this rather long-awaited change and of the future of the clinical trials in Europe. It seems that there are going to be some significant advantages for stakeholders. We've talked about transparency, about harmonization, certainly faster assessment times are concerns for a lot of sponsors. That said, the CTR is a big change compared to what we're used to with the Clinical Trials Directive. The survey data indicates potential uncertainty about the understanding about what's required. And I think it does question our preparedness, if I've heard you well, as an industry. That uncertainty requires a review of systems, processes, organization, and training to ensure that we're all ready for this deadline. So the key message, it seems, is that if you're not ready, get going now. If you need any help and support, we have two fantastic experts here from Arriello who will be delighted to help you if you need to outsource, and that's the business model that your company's using. But no time to lose. Get going and good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks, Laura.